Hi, welcome to Still Evolving, where we explore the truth behind lasting performance and resilience. Rather than relying on perfection or superhuman ability, our conversation will highlight how real strength emerges through simple, intentional habits grounded in self-compassion, adaptability, and the ability to grow through life's inevitable setbacks. Today, we're talking with Dr. William V. Flores, a nationally recognized leader in higher education, public policy, and the nonprofit sector. Dr. Flores has served as president of the University of Houston downtown and held leadership roles that have shaped universities, communities, and organizations across the country. He has been named one of Time Magazine's top 100 outstanding Hispanic leaders and was recognized as a point of light by President George H.W. Bush for his public service. Beyond his executive work, Dr. Flores serves on numerous nonprofit and civic boards, mentors emerging higher ed leaders nationwide, and continues to guide institutions through transformation and growth. He's also the author of The Texas Experiment and Nonprofit Management, Moving Your Nonprofit from Where It Is to Where You Want It to Be. Two books reflect his deep insight into leadership, equity, and organizational impact. Please welcome Dr. Flores. Welcome, Bill. I'm so grateful to have you on Still Evolving and have this opportunity to have a conversation around your journey and the lessons learned. So without further ado, we'll jump in. And if you could share back like the highlights of your journey, perhaps where you've come from to where you are now, what you're working on. We'd love
Sure.
to hear more.
Well, first of all, thank you, Amy. I really like the idea, and what you're doing is inspiring because it allows people to learn from others and obstacles that all of us face in life and how we respond to them. At different points in my life, I took career turns, not necessarily because I chose it, but because things that happened to our family or in society or the economy. And I think that we all face those kinds of things. I learned a lot growing up from my parents and from family members. When I was a kid, I grew up in San Diego. My dad had dropped, this is during World War II, not for me. I mean, I grew up after that. But my mother and father, when World War II broke out, my dad dropped out of high school and enrolled in the Army, and he enlisted. He went on to get a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, and faced discrimination when he came back, as many soldiers did, and because there was discrimination against Black soldiers and Mexican Americans. My mom and he also faced some discrimination trying to find a place to buy a house or to get a loan. And as I grew up, I didn't really understand that. I saw that we moved around, that the family home had been destroyed for a freeway. And, I began to understand as I grew up. My dad decided to go back, work on his high school diploma, taking courses at night while working full time. My mom, who had graduated from high school, she tutored him. And through that process, him studying early in the morning and late at night and me watching, I started to study with him, and I started to learn the joy of reading. I started, I was learning when I was 6 years old, mathematics, because that's what he was
Wow.
studying. And but I started to really enjoy the love of reading. He had one book, the Bible, and so we'd read the Bible. My mom on Tuesdays or some day, the Goodwill would have sales on. You bring a box and you can fill it up of paperback books, for $1. So that's what she'd do. She'd go, she'd get magazines, she'd get books, whatever she could, and she'd bring them back, and then we'd read them. And bit by bit, my education took place that way. I learned from them. I learned dedication, perseverance, and we eventually were able to save money and buy a house. Or actually, my dad was able to get a GI loan along with what they saved. So that experience taught me a lot of things. The other was my dad always said, son, realize people are going to tell you no. They're going to tell you no over and over again. But that's just a beginning point for negotiation. Don't take no for an answer. And if they still won't tell you no, look someplace else. But keep your dream and you will find yes. Either someone's going to give it or you're going to make it. And so
Wow.
that was a belief that guided me, empowered me. And, I, like my brothers and I, nobody had gone to college, not only in my nuclear family, but in all my cousins. And we had many of them. So did not grow up initially thinking about going to college. I was just hoping to get to high school. I worked lots of odd jobs starting from the age of 12. And by 14, I was working in a restaurant. By 15, I was working in an aircraft company. I worked every summer and my senior year, you worked nights after high school. All of that, though, and some of the experiences, which were great experiences, I learned a lot of respect for people I worked with, and I learned to listen. And I really encourage people to do that because later in life, I became a president of a university. I had a PhD. I did not expect ever to achieve that. I would have been happy when I was a machinist. I was happy, but it was an explosion and people got injured. I got injured, and I decided, I was making good money, but let me try something different. And that's why.
I love it to hear the foundation and the value of learning, and how that evolves throughout your journey to the point of where, as a leader, learning is you have to have the foundation of openness and listening. Like, you're not going to learn if you're closed off to hearing different perspectives, ideas, or even challenge, which can be pretty difficult. But the power also that came from the connection along the way. Thank you for sharing on your parents' journey and when they met adversity, kind of the lifelong lesson that trickled down to you around that find a way mindset that your father really embodied in encouraging you not to just stop at that first no. I talk with my daughters a lot about that. I'm like, you're going to get so many
Yeah,
more
you
no's
never
in
stop.
life. You're going to get so many more no's in life than you are yeses. And so how you adapt or flex when you come across a no, perhaps it's an opportunity to learn. Perhaps it's an opportunity to kind of come back, reflect, and make some adjustments in how you're going about whatever mission you're on. So thank you so much. You reflected a bit on when adversity struck for your parents. I'm curious, and I would love to learn more about how you responded and how you evolved following that explosion experience that you had as a machinist. But
Well,
like when adversity struck, how'd you get through it?
first of all, I think one of the things that I saw too was in family members who, somewhere in wheelchairs. My aunt had been Francisca Flores. She became a journalist and she wrote her own newsletter, her own magazine. Actually got me involved when I was at UCLA in working with her on the magazine. But this was a woman who, when she was 15, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Her brother, my dad's oldest brother, died when he was 19. And so she had only one lung. She was in the sanitarium for 10 years. When I got to know her, she had, of course, it was years later. I was shocked to find out that she only had one lung and had been on permanent disability. She would never stop. She was always working, not only for her betterment of the community, especially the Mexican American East Side community in Los Angeles. And so that taught me again, we could, being disadvantaged, being disabled, those are mental blocks as well as physical blocks, but you can overcome the physical if you have the right mental attitude. Later in life, when I was in Fresno State, I got cancer and a stroke. And in fact, they weren't sure that I was going to make it. Um, there were times that, in fact, I didn't. I was legally dead for a few minutes. But the what happened is again attitude. So many people when they tell you you have cancer, it's a death sentence, and you feel like, okay, well, I might as well just give up. But, and then I had to have a stroke, which was caused by the chemo. It was so powerful that it affected my body and caused a reaction. But I thought about those lessons of the people that I knew, especially my aunt, but others as well, my dad, who, overcame health problems. And I decided that I was going to work every single day to get better. It was difficult. I was working on a book and I had to stop the book for a while until I could get back my physical as well as my mental capacity. I lost language ability. Before that, I spoke Spanish fluently. I spoke some Russian and had taken years of Russian, and I lost all that. But I gained back, of course, English and the Spanish. The key thing is I kept a positive attitude. I worked daily to get better. And I had a view of what my life would look like. And I made a list of all the things I was going to do when I was better. And
Yeah.
each day I worked on that list and I worked on exercising and I worked on my mental attitude and it made a difference.
I sometimes we see when people bounce back or have the quote unquote success, we see them at the top of the podium, like the highly visible when you become university president, when perhaps a company IPOs, or perhaps, in elite athletics, you win the game. But so much more of that success is really embodied by the small steps every day. And I love you reflecting on when that adversity struck, it really became more about the process. Like every day, what's one thing that you could do to take a step forward, maybe mentally regaining the language, one thing that you could do physically to take a step forward, exercising. Can you get out for a walk? And all of that then compounds, right? Like it compounds in bringing you and your evolution to where you are now.
And during that
So
time, my mom and dad came to live with me for a while. My mom had had a whole series of strokes. So we'd hold each other up to go for a walk, and she also had Alzheimer's. So she'd take off sometimes if there wasn't somebody with her, forgetting where we were.
really holding her.
All of those, I decided, because I had my left hand remarker, that
Uh huh.
I was going to learn how to force myself to write left-handed and to paint left-handed. And
Wow.
as difficult as it was, I started doing that. And mentally focus on being able to close my fingers, being able to tighten my wrist, being able to move my leg, all of those things. You have to visualize it and you have to believe it. And I applied those things, not just to getting better, but to everything I do. It changed my whole life.
That mindset is so powerful. But really what I also heard in that is the resilience that was strengthened from the connections you had, maybe connections to the family and the lessons learned, connections to your mom, being able to go through
And
similar
friends
health
and colleagues.
challenge.
I
Right.
have a lot of friends and colleagues that came over that helped. They shopped for me. They made meals for me. They took over some of my classes that I was teaching.
Wow.
Until I could get better, and I started to get back. And each day, I look forward to being able to do one more thing.
Omar.
And um, a year later, uh, I was associate dean, became associate dean at Fresno State, and then dean at Cal State Northridge, and then provost at New Mexico State University, and then deputy secretary for higher education for the state of New Mexico, and then a president. But all of those things became possible partly because of attitude, but also because I had friends, colleagues, networks, mentors, and I also mentored others. It was sort of like the notion that somebody had given me a hand and lifted me up, and I was going to do that. I'm dedicated to doing it, and I've done it all my life.
I'm curious though, in that it sounds like certainly when adversity strikes, the people in your network and in your family and your professional world, like really just stepped up and that web really just helps strengthen us as we go forward. I'm curious what it was like, though, with your friends and your family and your professional network when you were able to celebrate those wins. You talked about how you bounced back and you became dean and then provost and then secretary and then president. Like, what was it like for you to be able to also celebrate and share the successes, if
Well,
you will?
one of the things too is, there were people that celebrated along with me and encouraged me, just taking steps, being able to walk a block was a huge accomplishment, left me tired, at the end of the day, just doing that. But bit by bit, you gain strength. And then friends were there to take me out for a meal or take me to a movie or whatever else, and then we had a big party once I went back to work. So
Okay.
both from friends that were neighbors and very close friends, and then both at Fresno State when I went back, they had a big sign, "Welcome back," and so that fills you with emotion, right? And I think that also helps you to know that you've had an impact on somebody's life, and you want to, because they were there genuinely to help me, and I, reciprocated. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I
Excellent.
learned too was that the importance of community. I had before the illness worked very closely with several community organizations and nonprofits, and done a lot of work in poor communities. And a lot of those people started sending cards and flowers. In fact, when I was at the hospital, they kept saying, you know, your whole room is filled with flowers, and they just kept coming and coming, and that just filled my heart too.
Yeah, humans, we come from that very close web, whether it's a village, whether that's the family, but that community is such a source of strength. And I love hearing how not only did you rely on that when adversity struck, but also then giving back to that. So I'm curious now in present day, you mentioned you mentor some others in leading and helping grow. Could you share with our audience a bit of what you're working on now and how you
Well,
continue to give back?
thank you. I've written several books since that time, and do it with colleagues rather than just write it by myself. Because a lot of times you take on a big project and it becomes more realistic when you're working with other people, but it's also more difficult because you know you can sit down and just write as opposed to spending
Right.
hours talking about what you're going to write.
Yes.
But I became deeper friends with people through that process. And, I wrote a book about democracy with presidents at 30 universities. And of course, I wrote several of the chapters in the book. I wrote a book on Texas government and politics with some colleagues here at the University of Houston downtown. And that's called The Texas Experiment. And that came out from Sage. And then I have a book that it came out this year on nonprofit management, moving your organization from where it is to where you want it to be. And I work with organizations not only in Texas but also in California, but elsewhere too. I'm working with a church in Ohio. I've worked with a group in Tennessee and another organization, Native Americans in Oklahoma. I've worked with several organizations through the students because they've made actions, but also through alums that have gone on and formed their own nonprofit or are now CEOs of nonprofits. And when you think about not the nonprofit sector, you don't realize its impact on the economy. In 2022, nonprofits, just the top 300,000, there's 1.8 million nonprofits. Really, 1.5 million are charities. Most are small, and the others are foundations or other kinds of organizations. But most of the organizations are small. The top 300,000 in 2022, and that's the most recent government figures, employed over 12 million people. And when you think about the GDP of nonprofits created 6% of all of the GDP in the country. And if you if you compared them to countries, well, at the time they actually made more money than Texas. Texas is a huge economy.
Right,
But if
right.
if nonprofits were their own country, they would be just behind France and above Brazil and Italy and Canada and several other countries. So
Wow.
they play a huge role, not to mention the impact on human, for feeding people, for providing homes, blood banks, things like that. So I take a great deal of pride. I really try to work with and help those nonprofits to survive, to develop business plans, to develop strategic plans so they can be successful and continue contributing. And this is a
I love
difficult time.
it. Yeah, it is a difficult time. Hats off to you. I love that the way in which that leadership is giving back and the downstream effects of that. You mentioned the economy impact, but also just the human and the community impact is so significant. Bill, in wrapping, I would love just to pick your brain and for you to be able to give our audience one of those key takeaways. You've mentioned many as you reflected on your journey and what you're working on now. But if there was one go-to strategy, tool, kind of tip that you have found like every day that you use to be able to keep evolving and pressing forward and making an impact and showing up in the way that it feels so authentic and meaningful to you, what have you found to be kind of that cornerstone piece of advice, tip, strategy that you use?
Well, I follow my passion, and also I look to when I wake up in the morning. Do I look forward to going to this job? Do I look forward to doing this anymore? And if the answer is yes, then I'm doing the right thing. If the answer is no, then start finding something else because there's a lot of bad bosses out there. There's a lot of jobs for that just brutalize you or sap your soul. Don't be satisfied with just, what you're doing. Of course, this is a tough economy, so don't just leave the job for
Right,
another.
right. Be
But you can't
strategic.
develop a plan to make that shift. Work on your resume. Use your networks. Find a mentor. Help
Right.
find someone that's doing what you want to do and ask them, how did they get there? And use that as an opportunity to change what you're doing and bit by bit.
Love it. It starts with that action of reflection, like just checking in with yourself. Where are you? And if the data suggests that perhaps it's not the direction you want, then how do you then adapt and start on a new journey with, like you said, maybe getting more information, learning from others, connecting with others, but certainly those opportunities do exist and having hope for that. So, Bill, what a pleasure. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation and learning from you, and um, very grateful for all the service that you have given back to the many around you. So, thank you so much.
And we thank you for the opportunity. And it's a joy to talk with you and to be a part of this.
Awesome.